This Choircast podcast episode is brought to you by The Wisdom of Hobbits, by me, Matthew J. DiStefano. In this hopeful yet at times poignant homage, I focus on everyone's favorite halfling friend, the Hobbit. A charming people, this Shire-based race has captivated, enthralled, and enchanted the hearts and minds of millions. And though they're not a religious society, I argue that spiritual truths, love, kindness, generosity, hope, and even compassion can be found within their familiar, yet still relevant and didactic tales. Available now on Amazon, Barnes & Noble, or wherever you get your fine books. From Choir Publishing.
Liminal. A word 1,000 miles wide but small enough to fit into the present moment. It describes an in-between place. We live most of our lives within this space, not quite ever arriving at our idealistic final destination. We spend so much of our energies on our best impersonation of who we wish we were, until we can't. But in sneaks a dark night of the soul, or perhaps a mystical experience. Our way of being has an error loop introduced. Today we call that deconstruction. Welcome to the Liminal Living Podcast, where we teach you how to be here, how to traverse these spaces, and where we can go if we remain humble, open, and honest. Alright, you want to jump in?
Yeah.
Oh, did that come through the microphone? I just cracked my neck. Something fierce.
I didn't hear it.
You didn't hear it? It was glorious. Well, welcome to the Liminal Living Podcast. My name is Dr. Tom Rendell, and I'm with my friend Dr. Paul Jones again this week. How you doing today, Paul?
Great, man. How are you?
I'm doing pretty good. I got to see the Northern Lights. They were pretty amazing. That was one of the things on my bucket list, and you got to see them all the way down in Alabama. That's crazy.
Yeah. We didn't think we were going to get to see any of them, but yeah, it was pretty neat. Did you see the Starlink satellites?
I've seen the train before going through the sky, but I didn't see them recently.
Yeah, they were going through. We saw them this weekend too. That was pretty neat.
Yeah, I didn't know what it was before I saw it. I just saw these like lights in a line going through the sky, and I'm on my phone Googling, what in the heck is this thing?
Yeah, people on social media were like, what is that? What is that? You know, somebody said it's aliens coming to invade. And I'm like, let me go see that.
Please invade us. We need help. Oh, well, today we got Daniel Wolpert on the show, and Daniel is a Presbyterian minister, and he's a reverend, research scientist, psychologist, spiritual director, farmer, teacher, and construction worker. What do you think of all of that list?
Wow.
Yeah.
You know, it all lined up, boom, 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 and then construction worker.
Yeah.
Like, that's pretty neat, though. You know, it fits in with, I don't know, it fits into me. I like him more. He sounds like a monk living in the world.
You know, I was about to say the same thing. It's like he has the job description of a monk right there.
Yeah.
Because you got all that from farming. He just needs to be a brewer of like whiskey or beer, and then it's all complete, I think.
Yeah. He'll reach his Jedi status then.
Well, he's authored and co-authored about 8 books, and he's pastored or interim pastored lots of churches and done retreats and given talks, and he's co-founded the Minnesota Institute of Contemplation and Healing. So this guy's got a pretty big resume, you know what I'm saying?
Yeah, he's busy.
Now, I sent the audio to you so that you could kind of preview it so we can do a little intros thing. And I came up with a new thing. We're implementing it today, and it's the Samuel L. Jackson scale. Because you are texting me some MFers, like every time something blows your mind, you just text me like, MFer. Yeah. So I'm keeping it a little clean on the intro here. But
if you get an MFer from me, that's like one of the highest compliments, because you just blew my mind.
So where does it, on a scale of 1 to 10, where does this fall on the Samuel L. Jackson scale in Paul's realm? Of 1 being, he didn't get any, and 10 being like you had to close yourself in a room because the MFers were just flying like water?
I would say a good 7. Yeah. Yeah,
Nice.
we were at some conservative family. Not conservative. They just don't talk like that. Um, you know, I've always had a foul mouth, and yeah, I had to watch as I was listening because it can just come out. And yeah, it was funny. So yeah, I mean, um, it was really some of the statements he said was just wow. I never thought of that, or wow. Um, um, One particular statement that really got me was um, when he talks about Jesus not returning as quickly as the early church thought, and that's why we had to start thinking of the afterlife, like
Yeah.
course correcting, because you read the early church history, we look back with rose-colored glasses, but man, there was a lot of it wasn't just beautiful and perfect like everybody wants it to be. There was a lot of disagreements quick, and um, they had to change their mind. And yeah, that really struck me.
Yeah.
You know,
Yeah, me too. Because it
uh,
created a theological problem for them that they had to figure out. And it's like,
yeah, yeah,
yeah, but
yeah,
that contextualizing, I think we've got theological problems today that we got to figure out because things are not happening like we thought they were gonna,
yeah,
in how we were taught and raised, and so now we got to contextualize again. And so yeah,
yeah,
the evolution of the church goes forward. Well, let's set
yeah.
people loose on this episode, and we'll catch you back around on the backside. All right, now we're rolling. We're officially rolling.
Sounds great.
And you're Reverend Daniel Wolpert.
That is true. That is true. It's good to be here.
Well, I connected with you online through the Center
Hmm.
for Prophetic Imagination. That's where I found you. And
Right.
you were having some great conversations in that space. And I was just like, who is this guy that is like this, heading up this Institute for Contemplation and Healing? Like, I need to know this guy. So I just started following you and what you've been doing, and you're recently putting out a book. So, yeah, Dan, welcome to the Liminal Living podcast. It's finally good to see you face to face.
I really appreciate you having me. It's great to be here.
Well, just tell us a little bit about what you are up to in your life. You recently had a move to Seattle from Minnesota, so that's new. But
Hmm.
like, what are you up to? What do you like to do, and how is God using you in this world?
Well, as you mentioned, we've come to Seattle recently, and a big inspiration for that move is my new role in the world, which is being a grandfather. So we have an almost 2 year that we do a lot of babysitting for, and I have to say, in many ways, that is probably the most valuable thing that I do right now. Uh, is spending time with this new little fellow that's growing up in our world. So that's really wonderful. But generation is as a student of the spiritual life, and that's what I've been doing since I was, well, really forever, which, at this point is getting to be decades long. And so that is really the ongoing focus of my life. Paying attention to myself, to others, to the world, to the society, communities that I'm a part of, and just that ongoing practice really forms the core of what I do. And as I like to say, I've had a lot of different jobs to support my contemplative addiction, but really the contemplation piece is always the main thing.
What was your gateway into the world of contemplation and that spirituality?
Hmm. Well, so when I was young, uh, starting at a very early age, I began to have what I might describe now as a number of mystical experiences, mostly experiences very profound connections with the natural world, and then when I was 19, 20, I hitchhiked to Alaska, and I took with me a little book on Buddhism, and I really don't even remember why I decided to do that. At the time, the Alaskan highway was still paved, and it was wilderness up there. And I'm reading about this contemplative life, and I really realized, like, this is the thing that I want to do. This is what is going to help me to integrate these experiences that I've been having. This is what I think the world needs, and it became very clear that that was the core of what I was to be up to for my life.
How would you define contemplation to somebody who's just like approaching it for the very first time? What does that mean to you?
Mm-hmm. So to me, the most basic definition of contemplation is a direct examination of reality through the use of our senses. So it really is a set of habits and practices that call us to pay attention to what is going on. Our basic state as human beings is confusion. We experience this world, we experience all these things happening to us, and we really are pretty confused about what's going on. I mean, there's a lot that we think we know, there's a lot that we try to know, but we're also continually surprised by what is happening, and are full of fear and anxiety, and there's a lot of suffering, and so contemplation is this very, very ancient, long history of practice of paying attention to reality to help us to understand not only what is going on, but also to understand how to alleviate suffering, which is really the basic thrust of the spiritual life.
How does contemplation alleviate suffering?
So the question, how does contemplation help alleviate suffering? So there's a couple of different things that happen. I mean, the first one is that as we come to relate to and understand reality in a deeper and deeper way, as we develop our awareness, that actually frees us from a whole host of habits and patterns that in many ways are the source of a lot of our suffering. So we become more compassionate, free people. So that's one of the things that happens on an individual level. But then there's also this communal piece, right? And particularly within the American context, I mean, I have to keep repeating over and over and over again that these practices are supposed to be communal because we live in a highly individualistic society, and everybody just thinks about this as, my spiritual life and my spiritual practice. But really, it is supposed to be our spiritual life and our spiritual practice. And so the idea is that, again, as we become free from our ego habits and patterns, our projections, all of the ways in which we imprison ourselves and each other, we are able to relate to each other much more humanely and with greater love and compassion and care. And so it is all of that activity that creates less suffering, or that results in less suffering.
So there's like an aspect of putting yourself in the world in a way that has less illusion to it, because you've kind of been awakened through these different practices that kind of broaden your awareness of maybe some illusions you're holding on to.
Right. I mean, illusion is certainly one way of putting it. So again, the human being, the human person, what is that? Who are we? Right. And contemplative psychology is the field that discusses all of this, and we really are a bundle of, as I said, these habits and activities that not only create our sense of self, but also create our sense of the world. So we internally create ourselves, but then we also are projecting that out, and we're creating the world. So the unfortunate fact is that there aren't 8 billion people on this planet sharing the same planet. There are 8 billion people on this planet, each living within their own little reality. And those realities are constantly bumping up against each other and causing a tremendous amount of friction and conflict. And then layered on that, you have all the collective realities that we live in. So our tribe, our nation, our group of people, our ethnicity, our race. I mean, all of these constructions make up what is called conceptual reality. And that is full of all of these both habits of activity, but then also projections. And that's, illusion is another way of talking about that, right? And so, yeah, we go around thinking that I'm engaging with other people, I'm engaging with other groups or communities, but really what I'm mostly engaging with is my own projection. And so that's where we create enemies. We have all kinds of conflict and disagreement, and that engenders a lot of fear and a lot of bad behavior of all kinds. Right? And so the spiritual life seeks to kind of dissolve all of that projection, right? So that we're able to listen to one another and hear and experience one another, first ourselves, and then other people as being more fully human, or the Christian tradition talks about the image of God that we all have, right? And so now I'm able to relate to my experience in a way that is much more peaceful and loving, rather than one that is very fear-based and then often very violent.
And that seems to be, you seem to describe like where we are as a world, as a country, where we have these individual worlds that then coalesce around these camps, and then those camps then are butting up to one another, and we give them names like left or right or conservative or progressive or Democrat or Republican or whatever. How does one practice contemplation within their sphere, and kind of how can you remain a part of your tribe and yet have the illusion dissolve around you and yet still belong? A lot of people, when they go through a deconstruction or just a questioning phase, it puts them on the outside or on the edge of their tribe or belonging. Is there a way to still identify and still belong with people who have not gone on the journey, who have not been awakened or have seen just the illusion and reality and versus reality around them?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, well, this is sort of the ongoing conundrum, right, of people and communities that engage in the spiritual life. I mean, one great example that I think about is the monastery at Iona, Scotland, which was originally formed in the 6th century and finally closed its doors for the last time in the mid-1400s. And the reason really that the monastery finally closed, in part it had to do with some of what was happening internally in the British Isles. But a big part of it was, the Vikings would kind of come around the top of Scotland, and they'd show up on the island, and the monks would come down to greet them, and the Vikings would just chop them to pieces. And so after a while, that made the community very non-viable, right? And so you had these real two collision of worldviews and approaches to how we relate to one another. And being in the world is challenging, right? Period, whether you're contemplating or not. And certainly as people and groups develop greater and greater awareness and desire to be in the world in a really transformed, loving way. I mean, one of the real challenges with that is that you see all of the suffering that is going on, and you see the suffering that people put themselves through, you see the suffering that we put each other through, and that's very painful and sad. And we also see that we can't just fix that, right? And that's also sad. So, one of the most basic definitions of, and this comes out of the Buddhist tradition, right? A bodhisattva is somebody who is become enlightened but chooses to stay in the midst of the suffering world to help others. It's very difficult, and that manifests in different ways. And of course, in the Hebrew scriptural tradition, right, we have these prophets who are hearing what it is that God wants and comes and tells people that. And of course, rather than going, oh, that's a great idea, yeah, let's do that, they say, no, we're not going to do that, let's kill you, or let's, put you in jail or send you to the desert. I mean, so that is a challenge of the spiritual life, right? That the world is very caught up in its own ego activity, and that's very powerful.
Yeah, and I like the book that you wrote. That looking inward, living outward, kind of you're marrying these two things together, where it's you have to have that contemplative inward journey, but then there has to be a resolution of that journey in like your lived experience and what you're aiming to do with it. And that I really like that. What gave birth to this book in this time?
Well, in many ways, I would say that this book is a culmination or a manifestation of what I've been trying to do my whole life. I mean, I have always been very puzzled by the fact that in the American setting, there is this idea that somehow contemplation and action are separate things. And you encounter this all the time. And this notion that contemplation is somehow individual navel gazing, and social justice or activism is this real, that's the good thing, the outward trying to change society for the better thing. And to me, and certainly in the tradition, I mean, there's nothing in the contemplative tradition that validates that view. And so for me, these have always been two sides of the same coin. I mean, they go hand in hand, because, again, what the contemplative life does, especially when practiced in community, is it draws us out into the world. And we desire for there to be less suffering in the world. So in part, the inspiration for this book is just to help people recognize that these two things go hand in hand, and to really help help people, help groups come to understand how that works, how that dynamic works, and how we can intentionally practice that.
Yeah, it seems like a lot of my favorite contemplatives, they start off with that inward journey, but then a lot of their writings as they mature ends up being something socially active. Like if you look at my favorite contemplative writer, Thomas Merton, his, first couple of books is, My Journey, Seven Story Mountain, and then New Seeds of Contemplation. And then from there, like he writes this awesome book, Faith and Violence. And, he speaks out against the Vietnam War. He speaks out for the civil rights movement, speaks out against the nuclear armament of the world. And I'm thinking, wow, this is just a contemplative little monk in Kentucky, but he's writing this really profound things to where I think the CIA actually had they had him tagged as this is somebody we have to monitor because he's saying things that are against, our empire that we're building. And it seems like contemplation does end in this action. And I like how your book takes the Sermon on the Mount and breaks it down into these 12 practices that kind of ground you in the teachings of Jesus, but not just in this navel gazing kind of way, but this is for social transformation. And in the introduction, you wrote the words, "The point of this book isn't to make you feel bad about what you're not doing, but rather to invite you into some more profound ways of engaging in life with God." So why is it that when we talk about social transformation, so much guilt is stirred up within people, especially white people? We're talking about, well, we got to change the structures that our society is built on because they are, classist or racist or sexist. And then all of a sudden there's a lot of guilt that's felt. And your quote really speaks out to that.
Yeah. Yeah. So there are a few different layers to that. So the first layer, in many ways, has to do with how people have been formed within Christianity. And so, if God is what I like to describe as this psychotic warlord who is basically this invisible being that is kind of out to get you, and a few people take the elevator up to heaven, but most of the people take the elevator down to hell, then any hint that you are doing your faith wrong generates a lot of anxiety, right? Because now, maybe God doesn't like me, and maybe now I'm in trouble, and this is very, very powerful. And even people that claim they don't believe any of this, if they have been formed in the Christian church, this is in there somewhere in their DNA. And I've seen this over and over and over again. So that's one layer of it, right? Any suggestion that I'm doing my faith wrong kind of activates this anxiety. Now then, there is this other layer where you mentioned white folks, where we simply have never come to terms in any kind of serious way with the horror that whiteness and colonialism and all of that has visited upon millions and millions of people, not just in North America, but all over the world. And the horror of what has been done to African peoples, to Native peoples, is so profound that we really, we again being white folks, do not want to look at that in a serious way. And so again, as soon as you bump up against social transformation or social justice, you have to look at all those things, because those things not only are still ongoing in many ways, but there are profound social and justice ramifications to all of that that would suddenly have to start being unpacked. And that just feels very overwhelming and kind of terrifying, and so we just don't want to deal with it.
Yeah, it makes us feel bad, and when it kind of boils down to that, I'm either going to go to heaven or I'm not. Kind of a dichotomy. That's a false dichotomy, I think. We tend to look, once you pull that dichotomy lens off and you read the Bible again, it makes so much more sense. And you pulled those lenses off when you read the Sermon on the Mount, and you actually say that these teachings are more for this life and this world than the next. How did we get so preoccupied with this dichotomy of heaven and hell and the end of the world that we just stop engaging in any kind of social transformation and spiritual awakening in this life?
Well, historically, really the main thrust for all of that has to do with Christianity getting absorbed by the Roman Empire, right? And then subsequent empires, right? I mean, then you got the Roman Empire, you've got various other European empires, you've got the British Empire, you now have the American Empire. So, it has continued to kind of roll down the line. And I mean, what empire is always trying to do, and this is with religion, with economics, with social behavior, with class, with race, what empire is always trying to do is consolidate power and wealth with the few and oppress the many. And so that is an unjust, unloving, violent hierarchy. And you don't want social transformation because that would upend all of that, right? So you have to have various mechanisms and narratives and means of social control to avoid any sort of disruption of that hierarchy, right? And this is very, very old. I mean, one of my favorite passages in the Bible comes out of 1 Samuel 8, where the people are clamoring for a king, right? And they're like, every other country has a king. We just have judges. We want a king. We want to keep it as like the king keeping up with the Joneses, and
yeah.
And God just lays out, like, these are all the terrible things that the king is going to do to you, right? The king is going to steal all your stuff, going to steal all your kids, going to steal all your property. The king is going to mess you up, and you are going to be miserable. And don't do it, right? And the people are just like, we want a king. Right? And this is kind of this great example of what you were asking about earlier. Like, we just don't want to listen and pay attention, right? So this process has been going on for a long time, and so once Christianity gets taken over by the empire, what you see is, and Jesus does not come back right away, which was another historical sort of problem that Christianity had to deal with. You begin to see that all of the teachings start focusing more on the afterlife. Because if all of the results of whatever issue we're talking about, justice, peace, everything, if all of that is deferred to the afterlife, well, then the empire can do whatever it wants right now. And so that becomes a perfect mechanism for social control. And you see that just over and over and over again. And you're right, when we strip away that overlay from the Bible, suddenly the entire Bible makes a ton more sense, because the Bible isn't talking about the afterlife really at all. The entire thing is about what's going on now. And but again, if the kingdom of God gets transferred off of earth into heaven, now we don't have to have any of the positive results of the kingdom of God here. We just have to behave properly so that we get there after we die.
You just summed up my childhood religion. Right there. Have you read
Yeah.
Daniel Erlander's Manna and Mercy before?
No.
He's a Lutheran pastor, and he wrote this book called Manna and Mercy, and in it he is trying to sum up the entire narrative of the Bible as God setting things right. But there's this illustration that's always captured my imagination in there, and it's of when he's talking about Egypt and Moses and the Exodus. There is a pyramid, and at the top of the pyramid is the Pharaoh. Yes, and then they have like the pyramid divided like the food pyramid in America kind of a thing. The top
Right.
of the pyramid is the Pharaoh, and below him is the aristocracy, and then the working class, and the very bottom, that big layer, the thing that holds up the entire thing, is the slaves and the outcasts. And then but if you go all the way up to the Pharaoh, next to him is the military that protects what the empire has built, and then the other side is the priesthood. So providing God's blessing over what the empire is doing, all while being built on the bottom layer on the backs of the slaves and the common person. And like that, when you read Jesus's teachings as a critique of the empire that they are involved in, and a critique of the temple system that is trying to play nicely with the empire, it just seems to make a whole lot more sense. And that term "blessed" you used, in the Sermon on the Mount, people think I'm blessed when the empire blesses me with money and fame and recognition and fortune, but Jesus used it in some different ways. Can you define what most people think might be blessed and kind of juxtapose that with what Jesus is talking about?
Well, yeah, as you said, the common social definition is that I am blessed, or the sign that I am blessed in our society, for example, American society, is material wealth. Right? And of course, the greatest perversion of this is the prosperity gospel, right? That God wants me to have a lot of stuff and a lot of money, and so right. The idea of blessing is that if I get the goodies of the empire, then God must have blessed me, because that goes along with what you were saying about that religion just gets used to bless the empire. And, one of the most recent examples of this that we saw was the recent coronation of King Charles.
Oh, yeah.
And of course, Charles is the head of the Anglican Church Worldwide Communion. And, you have the Archbishop of Canterbury doing his coronation, which is a religious ceremony. And if you read the special little collect prayer that was written for that, which you can find online, basically it's all about, isn't it wonderful that Charles is the head of the church and God is blessing him, and this is so great. And there's nothing in there about the fact that the British royal family is the greatest crime family in the history of humanity. I mean, they have caused more suffering probably than any other single family unit ever in history. And yet here it is that they are being blessed by, these followers of Jesus. And it's a complete abomination. And I mean, and this continues, right? I mean, many people don't realize the British royal family owns serfs still. And we could spend a long time talking about what that looks like. But it's just wild. And so that becomes the idea of blessing, and we see this in American society all the time. This is one of the reasons why we hate poor people. Poor people get talked about as being lazy. It's all their fault. Of course, this is the exact opposite. I mean, the working poor work harder than anybody in our society, doing jobs that the vast majority of white middle-class folks don't want to do. But but blessing gets associated with wealth and positivity. And you even see this in, there are a lot of Christian missionary circles where folks are going to Africa, and they will say to you with a completely straight face, not thinking that they're horrendous racists, will say to you, well, the reason that people are poor in Africa is that they haven't accepted Jesus, and so they're not blessed, and we are blessed because we've accepted Jesus, and so this is what we have to do, is go there. And, again, no awareness of colonialism or slavery or economic extraction, any of these things. So that's the standard social view, and again, it's completely wedded with the empire. Jesus, on the other hand, really centers the people on the bottom of that pyramid, right? And that God is really interested in seeing the world from their point of view, and the center of the gospel, so to speak, are those who are the outcasts of society. And so they're not blessed because they're the outcasts of society, but they are the people, and this is Howard Thurman's great comment in Jesus and the Disinherited, right? What does the good news have to say for people whose backs are against the wall? Mm-hmm. Right? And that is the point of view, and that is the location where transformation and the gospel is interested in working most powerfully. Right? And so blessing enters human society, right? The transformative work of God enters human society from that point of view, not from the point of view of people who have all this stuff. And again, it says this over and over again in the Bible. Like, this isn't weird, but it's only weird if you have this other mask on that where you don't even hear that other stuff.
Yeah, I've noticed that we like to justify empire by putting like a benevolent face on things, where even like an individual will want to be rich, and then they'll help someone out at a gas station or a grocery store, a complete stranger, and then they feel good about themselves, and they want to amass power, wealth, and things, and then do benevolent things with it. But I've noticed that they're not benevolent people or benevolent souls when I interact with those people who that's their goal. I want to get as much money as I can so that I can do a little bit of good with it. I find that, like, especially with like a white male, and I'm a white male, but I found this even in my own heart, but in the past when I've wanted to have the blessing of the empire of wealth and fame and dominance in that, it's like I wanted to justify it with a little bit of benevolent face on it. Like, I just want to be, I'll be nice to this person, or I'll try and convince myself that I'm not racist in my heart by being nice to this, person of color or minority over here. And there's like that benevolent mask that goes over it. And, contemplation is kind of the removing of the mask, because we start to believe in the mask that we're wearing. And you talk about that a little bit when you talk about the human ego. Can you define a little bit about what the ego is and how it gets in the way of that spiritual awakening process?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So the term ego is defined in a number of different ways depending on the particular psychology frame that one is using, right? So you have the ego in Western psychology. You have, but then you also have the ego in the contemplative psychology stream, and so and they're actually a little different in some ways, quite different. So when I'm talking about this from the contemplative lens, the ego is not a solid thing, right? So it's not like I got this little person running around inside of me, right, that I can find, right? So the ego is really this sum of mental activity that literally constructs the world out of our sensory experience. It constructs ourself and the world, right? And, we can think of this in some ways like when movie used to be on film and you'd have all these little pictures and they run at 24 frames per second and you get a moving picture, right? So our brain is doing that all the time. We get all of this sensory input, right, through our body, sight, hearing, taste, touch, all these senses. We then ignore actually most of our sensory input because there's too much of it. And out of the very, very small percentage that we pay attention to, we construct a sense of who we are, what we like, and what we don't like. And then we are repeating these patterns over and over and over again. And we're always doing this kind of confirmation bias with our sensory input, where the stuff that contradicts who we are and what we like and don't like, we ignore, or we put in the don't like category. And then we're running this movie all the time. So from the contemplative point of view, that is the ego. It's a process. It's not a thing. And reality then is also a constructed process, not a solid thing. And again, this is not what our sort of normal everyday experience is. We experience everything as being very solid, and you hear people say this all the time, well, that's just the way I am, that's just the way we are, that's the way we've always done it. All of these statements of tremendous solidity. And that gets in the way of everything. I mean, that really is the source of all of this suffering. Are all these solid constructs that are continually coming into conflict with one another. What the contemplative process does is it allows our mind to slow down so that we start to see this construction process. And the spaces, again, you can imagine the space between all the pictures in the movie, right? There's this little black space between all the frames. Right, so that space begins to expand, and our mind slows down very naturally when we do contemplative practice. I mean, that's the great thing about this, is that in the same way that our mind constructs the ego very naturally without us doing anything about it when we're little kids. I mean, we don't do this on purpose. It just happens by itself. It's a natural part of our development. In the same way, our mind unravels also by itself when we do these practices. And this is the reason that contemplation works. I mean, if I had to do this consciously, like, I'm trying to slow down the movie in my head, like, you can't do that. But when we engage in these practices of paying attention, our mind starts to slow down, which means that there's a great deal more space around all of our constructs. And so the ego self, in many ways, just simply unravels, becomes far less claustrophobic. And now I'm much more open to that realm in which we say that God exists, right? This spiritual realm where there is a lot of energy that desires love and justice. And now I can participate in that much more fully. And so it's not like I, disappear, like go poof, and vanish somehow. But one way of talking about it is that we really become, we become more fully who we are. Right, there is not the layer of all of those habitual accretions. This is this great image in the Bible of, the dross coming off of the pure gold, right? So that dross, all of that junk around the gold in the ore, that's the ego process, right? And as that all goes away, what comes out is that gold, that basic image of God, who each one of us really is.
I like that. Thomas Merton said something about how far I have to go to arrive at He in whom I'm already found, kind of a thing.
Mm-hmm.
Like there's a process that we have to, like we already are this, but we have so many different layers on top of it that we forget who we are. And I found in my own journey, like when I go through like a deconstruction process or just arrive at new information or enlightenment, whatever you want to call it, it's like, oh, I've always thought this. I've always believed this. I've always known this, but I had all this extra ideas or dichotomies or ideologies, or just fears and anxieties in place. You know, like I never believed in hell. I never thought it was really real, but I was too afraid to admit to that because of all the consequences. So then you veil that in your mind and you say, well,
Right.
We're not going to look at that. Yes, you have that doubt. You have that little sliver of a doubt in your mind. It's back there somewhere. Let's forget about that. Let's just put on the show, you know, do a good impersonation of who you think you should be in front of all these people that you think they're going to like it. And like contemplation for me was the path to who I was, like you said. Like it's the path back to becoming who I already am, not who I was meant to be or my best self or my fullest self or whatever else language they're using today, but who I originally am if I'm not anxious. And I like how you just give these practices in your book that they're based right off the Sermon on the Mount, right out of Jesus' teachings, and then they have these practical outputs. One of the things that I think is a really great image was in chapter 5, you're writing about powerful presence. And that powerful presence, like I know what that feels like when you can walk into a room and have the confidence to meet the needs of these people, or, there's other ways that you can have this powerful presence. And a lot of people are drawn to like a larger than life presence in our world. And it ends up in these like leadership abuse situations. What is the difference between someone with an inflated ego and someone with powerful presence?
Right. Yeah, that's a really great question. When you send me the questions in advance, I really love that one. And what I will say about all spiritual teachings, and of course, unfortunately, we see this all the time, is that all of them can be twisted to serve the ego self. Right. And so we always need to be aware of that. It's like you just shift them just a little bit and they still kind of sound good, but then something really starts to go wrong. And that's an important thing to be aware of. And I think this is a great example of that. Right. So powerful presence, I'm not talking about charisma at all, actually. So, and I'm not talking about, as you said, that kind of ego, the narcissist that walks in the room and somehow has a great deal of, the whole room pays attention to them and that sort of thing. What I'm actually talking about is what is presence like when there is less of an ego self. Right? So when there is less of an ego self, now I can really be fully present to another person, not for me, but for them. And the truth is that most people, and I've heard this over and over and over again for decades now, when I'm with people in some contemplative group setting, most people rarely have had the experience of somebody actually listening to them, of somebody actually being there for them, of an amount of time that another human being is devoting to caring about them. Most people never have that, or maybe they have that once or twice in their life. I mean, it's incredibly sad. And so what powerful presence is about is, now I am here with you no matter what is happening, and I am open to being with your experience. And so now my agendas, my ego projects, all my stuff is set aside, and I actually care about what is happening to you. And so really it's the opposite, right, of that kind of narcissistic charisma. I mean, it's the exact opposite. But you are certainly right that in terms of the way our society often responds to people and to leadership, that narcissistic charisma is a kind of presence that our society values. Of course, until that person is doing all sorts of, horrible things within their communal setting.
Yeah, I like that. It sounds like a more humble, like a humble confidence in. There's a lot of anxiety that's created, like in a situation of suffering. Like someone comes to you, they're like, I just lost my loved one, and they're a wreck. All of a sudden, anxiety is created within me. Like, oh my gosh, I got to fix the problem of their sadness in my presence. And then all of my interactions with them are now all about resolving my own anxiety to fix this problem, at least in my own head, so that I feel good with this encounter, and not necessarily being present to the suffering that is actually happening in this person's life, and listening to them and just offering presence and maybe a word like, I'm really sorry that happened. I think that is really needed in today's society. I don't think we know how to grieve very well. I think that's just really missing.
Yeah, we don't know how to grieve, and we don't know how to just sit with suffering that we can't fix.
Mm-hmm.
And the example that I give in the book is the example of my friend Ren, who died a number of years ago, and my going out there to be with him for a few days shortly before he died, and his comments about how it was just such a gift to him that there was someone that would just sit with him while he was dying, and knowing that we couldn't fix that, and how many people who had been very involved when he first started getting ill and wanted to do all these things, in part with the underlying idea that he would get better, how so many of those people just fell away as it became clear that his suffering was not going to be fixed, right? And most of the suffering of the world we can't fix. And that basic powerlessness, and again, we could talk about, the white dynamic around this, which is very powerful, where we're supposed to be the fixers and the savers and have all the best solutions and all of that. The individual powerlessness that we have is something that we really want to shy away from. Because again, that is the opposite of the ego project of building ourselves up as the masters of the universe, so to speak. And so a big part of the contemplative life, and this is connected to, you use the term humility, and that's one of the practices in the book, embracing our powerlessness is paradoxically one of the ways that we deeply connect to the power of God. And so, to be with the suffering of the world without being able to fix it, to being able to be present with somebody without being able to fix their problems, to be able to walk through the world embracing our creatureliness, which is largely pretty powerless. Again, paradoxically, this is one of the paths to becoming a powerful agent of change in the world.
Yeah, embracing the powerlessness of our own humanity. But that's what God did in the incarnation, was, that whole emptied himself of, everything that it was to be God, and then entered humanity as one of us, that Paul talks about in Philippians. And that's the central dogma of the Christian faith is, that Trinitarian God putting on flesh in the person of Jesus and walking amongst us as one of us. And embracing mortality and even death, and then through the power of love, overcoming death. That narrative is the thing that keeps drawing me to the stories of Jesus. The message of the gospel is that when you take the dichotomy off, when you take the how does this religion serve the empire, you take that off. How is it a critique of the empire? You look at it through that way. And I think one of the ways that it comes through clear is when we talk about money. In just your average American church, we'll say things like, oh, Jesus talks so much about money. He was always talking about money. And then we take the teachings of Jesus on money and then thread it through this capitalist, materialist, industrial society lens, and totally distort any of his teachings on money. And in your chapter 7, you talk about our relationship with money and the material world. And you said the kingdom of God is the kingdom of enough. But people do not have enough despite there being enough, because we serve wealth and not God. How did we miss such a major theme of the entire Bible, Old and New Testaments, I would say? And how is that? How is it that we keep justifying our enshrinement of the capitalistic wealth system at the expense of the poor in our churches today?
Well, so first of all, the contemplative stream of Christianity, generally speaking, did not miss that teaching. It's just that really became the minority report within imperial Christianity, right? And again, the way that we missed it is because if church has to serve empire, it has to serve wealth, because the empire is about becoming wealthy. And yeah, we distort those teachings. Actually, what we mostly do is ignore them. We just say, well, Jesus was just kidding, or Jesus meant that for Jesus, but not for us, And of course, Jesus doesn't have to worry about money because he's God, but we have to worry about money. The things that I've heard are really just pretty hilarious. But yeah, in our society, we worship money. That is our idol. That is our idol, 100%. And so the getting of money, the accumulating of money, the seeing money as being everything, that is what we focus our entire lives around. It's what we tell our kids they have to do. And the one way in which we acquiesce a little bit to some of these teachings, right, is charity. And you alluded to that earlier. And so, the latest example of that, right, is this sort of billionaire porn charity where we're just so enamored, when billionaires, build a school, or when billionaires, give away $1 million, or these various things. We think, oh, this is just so wonderful. It's not wonderful. It's not wonderful at all, because billionaires shouldn't exist. Right. So if you're willing to forget about the whole way that we got billionaires, then maybe it's wonderful. But Jesus talks about this, right? You got the example of the poor person putting in the donation of the temple, the rich person putting in the donation. And Jesus says, the rich person giving out of abundance, this is no big deal, right? If you have money and you give away money, that is not generosity, because you really should not have that excess to begin with. I mean, you're just trying to do what should be done anyway, and that's not an exceptional thing. But of course, you say this to the average charitable person, and they're just horrified and think that you're this awful, mean person. So, until we are willing to look at these economic structures and systems as part of our spiritual structure and system, we are never, the church is never going to get very far, because that is what we are worshiping, and that is what holds the most power over us and over our social systems. But again, the notion that there is not enough is simply a total lie, and we really have to call it a lie. It's not just some confusion or people. I mean, it is an actual constructed lie, and we could go down every social problem, whether you want to talk about food or housing or medical care or whatever. I mean, right now we're up to the latest statistic is that there are probably close to 30 empty houses for every unhoused person in America.
Wow.
Right? So, we just pause and think about that for a second, go, wait a minute, right? And yet you hear all this cry, oh, well, we need affordable housing. We need more housing. No, we don't need more housing. We need to share the housing that we already have. But then, of course, immediately people are, well, wait a minute, that's my house. That's my money. That's my equity. That's my retirement. That's my passive income. All these things. And people just go nuts. But, and this is why, as I said, people look at these teachings of Jesus and I preached on the Sermon on the Mount a lot. And, if we just did 1/10 of what was in there, society would be completely different. I mean, forget even doing all of it. We mostly, if you go down the list of what he talks about there, you can kind of check it off. No, we don't do that. We don't do that. We don't do that. We don't do that. Because again, if we were to do these things, society would become completely transformed. And that's what Jesus was interested in. I believe that's what God is interested in. And it would be great for the majority of people. But those in power would lose a lot of that accumulated wealth and power. And we don't like that idea.
Yeah, and if you look at Thomas Merton's, I keep quoting Thomas Merton, but that's just a hobby of mine. He says, I criticize the system and you take offense because you fully identify with the system. And we criticize wealth, and then the person says, well, how dare you criticize me? And it's like, oh, you are identifying with the system of wealth that I'm criticizing, and that's why you take offense. If we were to fix the wealth and inequality system, there would be, the world would be a much more pleasant place for everybody to live in. If we just even practiced the Jubilee of, let's just cancel everybody's debts, every 50 years, which is what, Israel was supposed to do and what Jesus called them back to, even in the Lord's Prayer. He's like, forgive us our debts as we forgive our debtors. That's right in the middle of the Lord's Prayer let's give us this day our daily bread and forgive us our debts. That's right in the middle. So that's supposed to be the central thing of what Jesus was about. And, our government proposes, forgiving partially some student debts of some people, and then, the conservative evangelical church loses its mind. Like it just shows you how disconnected that system is from the actual teachings and way and vision that Jesus had for this world. And it's a little disconcerting how they're doubling down on it in recent days. They're not waking up to the apocalypse that is, like there's a lot of things we're in a liminal place right now, because a lot of things are just really falling apart and they need restructuring. And the evangelical church's response to double down on their power, love of power and wealth and political prestige is just disconcerting. You got any hope for where this thing is headed in the next 10 years, 20 years? Like, what do you have any hope?
Yeah. So first of all, what you just gave, we were talking about the ego process earlier, right? And there are corporate ego processes as well as individual ego processes. And what you just described was a perfect example of how that ego process works. So again, you ignore the actual teachings of Jesus. You have this constructed teaching that you're identifying with. And even when you're presented with other information, right, as you said, you double down on your version of reality, right? And that's the way the ego seeks to maintain itself. So one of my favorite little spiritual practice phrases, I have all these little ditties that I keep coming back to and using in my own life and practice, is from the Buddhist tradition, which goes, give up all hope of fruition. And Christianity talks about hope a lot, usually in the context of hoping that we get to heaven. From the ego point of view and the contemplative point of view, there are some real problems with how we use the term hope, because often that's just about, I hope my version of reality comes to be, or I hope my project is successful. And so that's why I like this little phrase about giving up hope, which really is about, I let go of everything that my ego self thinks is or might be going on. And again, the paradox of that is that when I give up hope, that actually can bring me into a much more hopeful place, right? In the sense that whatever is happening and whatever does happen, right, there still is at the heart of reality this incredibly loving creative power. And that's the way things are. I mean, that just is the way things are. And I don't know how that's going to manifest. I don't know if hope means that, maybe hope means that human beings will become extinct. Maybe that's the most hopeful thing from the point of view of all creation. I don't know what the future looks like. I think there is no question that we are headed for more and more suffering. I mean, the trajectory that we are on in terms of the climate crisis in particular is not a good one at all. On the other hand, what I also do know is that historically, in these liminal apocalyptic times, many people turn very deeply to the contemplative life as a source of newness and inspiration. And I very much believe that that's what is happening now. I mean, the growth in the desire for the spiritual life that I've seen over my lifetime is phenomenal. I mean, this was not nearly at the level of popularity 40 years ago as it is now. And And so, that is the way in which human beings tap into this deep source of love and creativity. And that's a good thing. How exactly, what comes out of that, how that manifests, I have no idea. But what I do know is that engaging in the spiritual life produces better results than not engaging in the spiritual life. Yeah. So that's what I'm going to go with.
Yeah. I like Mother Julian of Norwich, her prayer that I think is pretty much, if someone says, what do I think hope is? I usually quote her. She says, all shall be well, and all shall be well, and all manner of things shall be well, for there is a force of love moving through the universe that holds us fast and will never let us go. And so I believe that. I don't know what that's going to look like in practicality as we move forward, but I believe that that is the end result of even an apocalyptic explosion of the entire world. Something will have, love will preserve something in some fashion. And I have no vision for what it looks like, but I have hope that it's worth working for. Well, thank you so much for being with me on the show today and talking about your book. Where do you want to send folks to purchase the book, and where do you want to send folks to connect with what you're doing in this world?
Yeah, well, first of all, thanks for having me on. This has been really fun seeing you more in person. We're still not totally in person, but a little more so than elsewhere online. And it's been great talking with you. So the book right now is available for pre-order at upperroombooks.org. The Upper Room is the publisher. So you can go there and pre-order it. Then coming in June, it will be available for purchase, all the usual places, in addition to the Upper Room, Amazon, Barnes & Noble, all those good places. As far as connecting with me and my work, at the moment, Facebook is the best way to find me quickly. And there may be some other web places to connect with me, but you can get my information there and contact me. As part of the book release, I'm doing some different events around the country. I would love to do those with anyone that is interested at your church or community or place, retreats or talks, things like that. And again, my email address is on my Facebook page, and I strive to make myself pretty accessible. So,
awesome.
So shoot me a note.
Well, I can attest to that accessibility. So you've always been quite responsive to me, and I'm with you on the Facebook. I think I'm old now because I go on Instagram and I don't even know what I'm looking at. I'm trying to figure it out, and it's just I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, I'm on all those places too, but I'm just much less active there.
Yeah, Facebook is the way to go for me too right now because I know that one. I'm familiar. I'm comfortable. I go on any other places, I don't know what's going on anymore. But thank you so much for being here on the show. I really love this conversation, and I learned a lot, and I'm rooting for you. I'll put those links in the show notes and send some people your way to grab that book.
Great. Thanks, Tom.
Yep. We'll see you later.
Take care. Bye.
All right. Well, let's record an outro and see what happens on that one. I got no plans.
I don't ever have a plan. I just follow your lead.
Well, thanks for listening to the Liminal Living Podcast with Daniel Wolpert. Paul, what'd you think of this episode?
Mind-blowing. I never had heard of him. So I was, he got my wheels thinking about some things, and I thought it was a great episode. What about you?
I really liked how he took the Sermon on the Mount. He took it outside of the usual like moralism or afterlife thoughts, and he put it into the realm of here are practices that you can do for social transformation. Because I think that's what they were like originally. Like if you dive into the context of the Sermon on the Mount, it's like here's nonviolent practices for you to oppose the empire with kind of stuff. And he's just readopting that version of it, and I think he did a really good job of it. So I liked it.
Yeah, I think I like that he used social transformation because I think biblical justice and social justice as terms have got now some baggage with them, and
For sure.
they can close us down when we hear them, depending on what side of the spectrum. But yeah, to me, that's what justice is about, is transformation. And yeah, I really, that was, yeah. He's really good at taking the theoretical and the contemplative, which I can struggle with understanding and bringing it down to the practical. This is how you get your hands dirty. And I thought he did really well, and had a very prophetic voice. I mean, he calls some stuff out that can make you uncomfortable in a good way.
Yeah,
you know.
I thought so. I thought you'd like him because I'll quote to you Thomas Merton, and you'll be like, I don't know what that means. Like, tell it to me straight. And this guy is telling it to us straight. He's just like, this is how it works. He's giving you practical stuff to do, and that it has a practical aim. Sometimes contemplatives miss that practical aim, and you just kind of get caught up in the mystical stuff. And I know I can do that, so it helps keep your feet on the ground, and I really liked it.
Yeah. I love Merton. I love the contemplative side of things, the mystical. I just want it to become, how do I digest it, and how does it help me live today? It was very helpful. Anytime someone can digest some of that stuff, because it's really good. I think it helps a lot of people and introduces a lot more people to the contemplative way of existence.
Yeah, he does it in a real practical way too.
Yeah.
Cool. Well, if you like this episode, make sure to share, make sure to subscribe, make sure to review and rate, and what other things are people doing with these nowadays that help boost algorithms? I don't even know anymore.
Yeah.
But whatever you do to show some appreciation, share it with a friend somehow. And next week we got Ben Catt, and we're talking about his book on the hero's journey, which should be pretty good. I'm looking forward to that one.
Yeah, me too.
Thanks for hanging out with me, Paul, and thanks for listening to this podcast episode. We'll see you next week.